It is 11 o'clock. This is Sky News, our top story. Putin agrees a ceasefire on energy targets in Ukraine after a 90-minute phone call with the US president. Ukraine responds to Putin's demands. We analyse if the agreement is a step towards peace. Also tonight, cutting the benefits bill. The government cracks down on welfare to save £5 billion, but is accused of choosing to penalise the worst off. More than 400 killed in Gaza, and evacuation orders issued as Israel's Prime Minister says fighting has resumed with full force.
And splashdown, Crew 9 back on Earth.
Applause for the splashdown of the astronauts finally back on Earth after being stranded for 9 months in space. We'll be hearing live from NASA later in the programme.
Good main release.
And also we'll have a full run-through for you of tomorrow's front pages. Hello there, good evening. After 3 years of war in Ukraine, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have agreed to a limited 30-day ceasefire. The White House said the US president and his Russian counterpart spoke for 90 minutes by phone and agreed that there will be a move to peace, beginning with a pause in violence on energy infrastructure. President Trump said it was a productive conversation. The Kremlin said it was committed to peace, and Ukraine's president said talks without Ukraine would not bring results. Sky's US correspondent Mark Stone reports now from the White House.
A pivotal call and a day of consequence it was, but not before a little delay. The White House may have been ready, but in Moscow, not quite. A power play maybe from President Putin, still on stage at the time set for the call with Donald Trump. The moderator reminding the president of his call, but he was in no hurry. It got underway shortly after, behind closed doors, and it lasted around 2 hours. Then a statement online from the American president. My conversation today with President Putin of Russia was a very good and productive one. We agreed to an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure, with an understanding that we will be working quickly to have a complete ceasefire and ultimately an end to this very horrible war between Russia and Ukraine, he said. The Russian interpretation said the call represented a detailed and frank exchange of views. The official readout following the call said, in the context of the US president's initiative to introduce a 30-day truce, the Russian side outlined a number of significant points. It was emphasized that the key condition for preventing the escalation of the conflict and working towards its resolution by political and diplomatic means should be the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kyiv. President Putin agreed to mutually refrain from striking infrastructure facilities for 30 days and immediately gave the Russian military the corresponding order. In short, then, despite Ukraine agreeing to a ceasefire days ago, Russia has not, instead committing to the bare minimum, because Putin believes he is winning this war. He has the upper hand, and he wants to continue fighting along that long front line. And with good reason from his perspective. This is a war about territory, and he wants as much of it as possible before committing to a stop. President Zelensky was in the far west of Ukraine today, a ceremony honouring the dead in this war.
We support all steps towards ending the war. We will give support, but in order to support something, we need to understand what specifically it is. If President Trump can find time, he is a busy man. If he has time, he can phone at any time. We are ready to pick up. We are ready to discuss the next steps with him.
Zelensky was scolded for telling Donald Trump not to trust Putin. Tonight, to the east of here, the sirens are blaring again. No pause by Russia, even after that phone call commitment. Mark Stone, Sky News, at the White House.
We'll continue with our coverage of that phone call, but one line of breaking news to bring you first of all. The US National Archives has released the JFK assassination records, that according to the Reuters news agency. We will bring you more as soon as we get it. That is one line in the last minute or so. In fact, there's more, let me tell you. Just reading it for the first time, so bear with me. US President Donald Trump has released material related to the 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy, seeking to honour his campaign promise, if you remember, to provide more transparency about the shock event in Texas. It's a lot of stuff, and you'll make your own determination, President Trump told reporters yesterday, saying 80,000 pages would be released. President Trump had signed an order shortly after taking office back in January related to the release, prompting the US Federal Bureau of Investigation to find thousands of new documents related to the Kennedy assassination in Dallas. And in the scramble to comply with Trump's order, the US Justice Department ordered some of its lawyers who handle sensitive national security matters to urgently review records from the assassination. Clearly, that has been happening over the last couple of months. A White House official saying the documents would be released today in the afternoon, which it is in America, through the National Archives. Kennedy's murder, if you remember back to 1963, or reports subsequently, was attributed to a sole gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. The Justice Department and other federal government bodies reaffirmed that conclusion in the intervening decades. But polls still show many Americans believe his death was a result of conspiracy. Just one further thought. There is a Fox News interview as well, Donald Trump speaking. He says he did not discuss aid, military aid to Ukraine with Putin, President Putin. That is one of his demands, that military aid to Ukraine ends during the 30-day ceasefire. We will no doubt get more on that interview and the JFK files shortly. In the meantime, let's go to back to Ukraine. And our security and defence analyst, Michael Clark, looks more closely at what came out of the phone call between Presidents Trump and Putin, and indeed what was missing.
When international diplomacy is conducted over a telephone call, it's not surprising that both sides might have different interpretations as to what was agreed. And both the White House statement and the Kremlin statement make for an interesting comparison. So this was the White House statement, really quite short. It talked about the need for improved bilateral relations between the United States and Russia, something President Trump is very keen on. It talked about a ceasefire on energy and infrastructure in Ukraine and in Russia, as well as technical negotiations on the implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. On the Middle East, it talked about the need to stop proliferation of strategic and nuclear weapons. It said that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel, quite an easy thing for the Russians to agree to. And it talked about the improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia with a huge upside. It said there are enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability to play for. The Kremlin statement, by contrast, was rather longer, and it said lots of things, but let's look at what it said about Ukraine itself. It said that a Ukraine ceasefire must be part of a comprehensive, sustainable and long-term process, a peace deal. In other words, you can't have a ceasefire until you've agreed everything. It talked about the need to eliminate the root causes of the crisis, which in President Putin's mind is everything he's been complaining about for the last 10 years or so. It talked about having effective control over a possible ceasefire along the whole line of contact, which is actually 1,200 kilometres. It talked about the need to stop the Ukrainians continuing to mobilise or to have armed forces in Ukraine or build up their armed forces during a ceasefire. So in other words, the Ukrainians weren't allowed to improve their position at all. And it called for a complete cessation of foreign military aid and intelligence sharing with Kiev, something that the Russians don't have to do themselves, but they're demanding that the Ukrainians do it. Putin said they would refrain from striking energy infrastructure. Not energy and infrastructure, the way the Americans put it, but energy infrastructure, which means it's a very narrow range of targets. It means that they could still strike military command and control, armoured facilities, civilians. It's only energy infrastructure targets that they've said they will exempt for 30 days. And President Putin said we've responded positively, and he's immediately given the Russian military the corresponding order to carry this out now, tonight. But actually, it doesn't mean a whole lot. In the Black Sea, it was agreed to begin negotiations towards a ceasefire. And if we look at a map of Ukraine, we see what this agreement really hasn't covered, which is a ground force ceasefire. The fact is, President Putin doesn't want a ceasefire on the ground because he's snuffed out the Kursk pocket in the north. He's got maybe 60,000 troops that he can redeploy round to the south and the southeast, and that in 3 or 4 weeks' time could make a real difference. And so as they take their different interpretations away from it tonight, President Trump will say that we've started the process of creating a peace plan. President Putin will know that that peace process will take a long time. And the longer it takes, the better off he thinks he will be on the ground in Ukraine.
Professor Michael Clark there with his assessment. Well, to the Middle East now, which in contrast is edging away from peace. Israel has continued to strike targets in Gaza today after an overnight bombardment which ended the ceasefire. The number of dead, now more than 400 according to the Hamas-run authorities. Sky's Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports and a warning. His report does contain images of some of the people who've died.
The ceasefire, which held for the best part of 2 months, ended without warning. Israel says that it targeted Hamas officials and infrastructure, but our teams filmed children among the dead and wounded. Many of the images are too graphic to show. This is one of the single deadliest days in Gaza during the war. Bodies were laid outside Gaza hospitals that were mostly destroyed during the war and are struggling to cope again.
So just utter carnage and destruction overnight. I was here in Gaza a year ago during the peak of the fighting in Khan Yunis, and the mass casualties back then looked exactly like the mass casualty that I saw today.
The Israeli airstrikes began shortly after 2 a.m., wave after wave across Gaza, and then backed up by tank artillery and fire from naval ships off the coast.
We were sleeping when suddenly, like a volcanic eruption, the strikes rained down, taking out children.
The Israeli airstrikes and the number of dead continued to rise through the day. During the ceasefire, Gazans had started to rebuild what was left of their lives after more than 15 months of war. But many feared that this moment was inevitable. Israel has issued evacuation orders for parts of Gaza. Palestinians who had returned home in recent weeks are now being forced back to humanitarian zones. Benjamin Netanyahu met with his key security officials hours after he gave the orders to resume the war.
From now on, Israel will take growing actions against Hamas with greater intensity. From now on, negotiations will only be under fire. Hamas has already felt the Israeli strength over the past 24 hours. And I want to promise to you and to Hamas that this is just the beginning.
Outside the Israeli parliament, an anti-government protest gathered to oppose the airstrikes. 59 hostages remain in Gaza, 24 of them thought to be alive.
I think nothing good will come from renewing the war and the fight. Not for the innocent people living in Gaza, not for the hostages there under the tunnels, nothing.
Many Israelis believe that Netanyahu has deliberately collapsed the ceasefire for his own political survival and to ensure that his coalition remains intact.
And it's hard to say whether or not the views expressed here reflect the majority of Israeli views. But a lot of people in Israel, it's safe to say, are quite skeptical about the reasons Israel is returning to fighting.
Hamas hasn't yet carried out counterattacks against Israel. They say they're working with mediators to prevent an escalation. But Israel has said it is ready to increase its attacks. And for now, they have the White House's backing. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, back here now, and the Work and Pensions Secretary has laid out the government's plan to fix what she called the broken benefit system and save £5 billion. Personal independence payments are not being frozen after a backlash from Labour MPs, but the number of people eligible will be cut. The government will scrap the Universal Credit Work Capability Assessment. That's from 2028, meaning that those applying for health and disability-related benefits will only be assessed once in the PIP system. There'll be a permanent above-inflation rise in universal credit, increasing the standard allowance by £775 in 2029 to 30. The job seekers allowance and employment and support allowance will be merged. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby, with more.
Did you get sign-off for the benefit cuts? Is it the right thing to do?
The party that created the welfare state
Is it a return of the nasty party, sir?
is now cutting it back.
Did you come into politics to cut benefits, Deputy Prime Minister?
A Labour cabinet has just signed off billions of pounds in cuts to the welfare budget. It was controversial in the room around the table, and it's going to be very controversial in the House of Commons with many a Labour MP.
Big changes on the way for Benefit Britain.
Liz Kendall.
This, then, a hard sell.
Millions of people who could work, trapped on benefits, denied the income, hope, dignity and self-respect that we know good work brings. And taxpayers paying millions more on the costs of failure.
The remedy, making it harder for people to claim disability benefits. Hundreds of thousands expected to lose personal independence payments if they suffer from milder mental health conditions and less severe physical difficulties.
Today we take decisive action, and I commend this statement to the House.
The goal, to shave £5 billion from the welfare bill by 2030. But in a concession to those sitting behind her, plans to also freeze disability payments dropped, still not good enough for some.
My friends, my family are very angry about this, and they do not think this is the kind of action that a Labour government takes.
There are alternative, more compassionate ways to balance the books, rather than on the back of sick and disabled people.
There are decisions made in this House that stay with you for the rest of your life. This is one of them. Trying to find up to £5 billion worth of cuts by changing the PIP rules, the criteria, will result in immense suffering, and we've seen it in the past, loss of life.
But the Conservatives push him for more.
This is too little, too late. The fact is, £5 billion just doesn't cut it with a bill so big going up so fast. She needed to be tougher. She should be saying, no more hard-working taxpayers funding the family next door not to work.
Hello. So will Liz Kendall have to come back for more?
Spending on working age, disability and sickness benefits will still rise over the Parliament, but we will be making savings by getting more people into work and by focusing those benefits on those
So £5 billion of savings you've identified now, are you saying that there will be billions more savings from the welfare bill in this Parliament?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is a major package of reforms.
But you're not ruling out more savings.
And I would suggest we talk about the proposals we are actually making, not those that we had.
Did you want to go further, though, Liz Kendall?
No, I
You did want to freeze PIP, didn't you?
I have never started from a sort of macho, tough position. I've never done politics like that.
You seem quite cross.
I am. You know I am cross. Because I've seen in my own constituency people written off to a life that is not the life they hoped for themselves.
Traditional Tory territory now taken on by a cash-strapped Labour government, whose search for savings could cast a long shadow over Starmer's domestic agenda. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
The government says the plan set out today will address a system that leaves people trapped out of work. But critics say the result will be that poverty levels will rise among people who want to work. Our social affairs correspondent, Becky Johnson, has been speaking to some of those affected.
Today, we tackle this problem head-on.
This problem, according to the government, is people like Katerina, young, not working and claiming disability benefits due to poor mental and physical health.
Really, the only thing I have right now that's keeping me going, I kind of do depend on it a lot. I'm not so sure if I'll be able to get a job that will accept me.
But the changes are being made because the number of people claiming sickness and disability benefits has soared. In Sutton-in-Ashfield, a former mining town in Nottinghamshire, almost a third of working-aged people are economically inactive. Many, like these, are young.
Do you apply for jobs?
Yeah.
I don't get anything back from places that I've tried.
Some people don't have the incentive to do it.
I'll mix it for you in a minute.
Holly claims disability benefits.
I still live with my parents, but I'm also on PIP. I have a medical condition that means I'm off sick a lot. I also have autism and ADHD.
Like most people claiming PIP, personal independence payment, she'll now face more frequent assessments and may risk losing it.
It shouldn't happen because I practically live off of it because I struggle to get buses and like trains and stuff.
With PIP you can work, can't you?
Yeah, you can work with PIP. It's just the fact that I don't know if I could work full time with it, and because I'm off sick a lot, I just don't know if I could be able to hold a job.
That's why she had been looking at another option.
I'm working on getting like a fit note at the moment.
That's a note from her doctor that would sign her off long-term sick. She'd get more in benefits, but the payments would stop even if she got part-time work. That's the perverse incentive the government's reforms are designed to tackle.
There are so many people I know that want to work but just can't, and because of the fit note thing.
People off sick currently get around double the amount these job seekers receive, but that will now change. The amount given in universal credit to people looking for work will go up, while the health top-up will go down and may even be stopped for under 22-year-olds.
If that sickness and disability benefit were to be reduced or indeed removed, what impact would that have on the young people that you work with?
I think you would get more young people seeking employment. There would be opportunities for them to try and find part-time work maybe that would suit with their health condition, and that would start to build their confidence with regards to actually getting a future in work.
The government says the changes are about unleashing talent. Opponents warn it'll be devastating for society's most vulnerable. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
A judge is due to sentence a teenager for murdering his family after his mother stopped him from committing a massacre on a nearby primary school. Nicholas Prosper's mother, Juliana Falcon, found her son with a shotgun before he killed her. A court heard how he was obsessed with school shootings and wanted notoriety. Today, more details of the attack were released. As Sky's national correspondent Tom Parmenter reports.
This is Nicholas Prosper, at home with a pretend gun, practicing how he would kill. He'd researched school massacres and wanted to be the most prolific school shooter in the world. But his mother, Juliana, denied him. Late at night, last September, she discovered her son with a shotgun in his bedroom in their 8th floor flat. In the struggle that followed, he shot his mum, as well as his sister, 13-year-old Giselle, and his brother, 16-year-old Kyle. The day before, Nicholas Prosper had bought a shotgun and 100 cartridges, duping a legitimate seller with a forged shotgun certificate that he had produced. He'd done surveillance of his old school, St. Joseph's Catholic Primary, and was planning to target at least 30 children, aged 4 and 5. The depth of the research and the meticulous planning has only now emerged, but it was his mother's intervention here that was crucial. He'd planned to kill his family while they slept, but such was the noise and the violence in the flat that Nicholas Prosper knew the police would be on their way. So he left here 3 hours before the school would be open. He had the shotgun and 33 cartridges. But before he got there, he was arrested by a police patrol. In a victim impact statement in court, his father, Raymond, said, "Our lives will never be the same. For me personally, when I heard the horrific news on that day, part of my soul died too. This is a lose-lose situation for us all, and we have lost 4 family members." His son led a dysfunctional life online, was obsessed with a young girl in a video game, and had indecent images of children on his phone. He's already confessed to the family killings. This hearing will determine the length of his prison sentence, which will be delivered on Wednesday morning. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Luton.
Well, it's all going a bit different tonight, timings-wise, isn't it? Anyway, coming up next, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, joined by the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, welcome, and the Observer's Chief Leader Writer, Sonia Sodha, welcome to you too. Certainly among the stories we'll be discussing this on the front page of The Times, its headline, Putin keeps ceasefire hopes on a knife edge. Picture 2 of Liz Kendall talking about benefits as well after the break.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon.
Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits still.
We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded.
This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh!
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Well, you're watching the press preview. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Observer's Chief Leader Writer, Sonia Sodha. Welcome and great to see you. Sorry you're delayed because of the space landing, splashdown.
Nice to be bumped for a happy story.
I know, it is.
Change.
And you might be bumped again soon because there's a NASA press conference coming up. But apart from that, it's great. So let's have a look at the front pages then, shall we? Putin rejects Trump's ceasefire is how the Telegraph describes the outcome of today's phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. The Times says hopes for a full ceasefire are now on a knife edge. The Express, meanwhile, carries comments from Prime Minister Keir Starmer that Ukraine must have a just and lasting peace. The announcement of £5 billion worth of cuts to the benefit system is top story for The Eye. The Mirror says the cuts have angered a lot of people, left many on benefits worried sick, it says, over what is to come. The Metro says the decision not to cut personal independence payments in cash terms was forced by a rebellion of backbench Labour MPs. The FT says, despite today's benefit cuts, the Chancellor will still need to reduce spending further in her spring statement next week. The case of would-be killer Nicholas Prosper leads the Daily Mail, which says the teenager had been planning the biggest gun massacre of the century. So Henry, Sonia are here. Should we start with what we learnt today in terms of benefits, welfare? The Metro pointing out that the PIP crackdown, these personal independence payments, was thwarted by a rebellion, but nonetheless, £5 billion of savings, Sonia, was made.
Yeah, so it was being briefed that the Treasury were looking for £6 to £7 billion worth of savings, and actually what they've come up with amounts to £5 billion, and that's because they've dropped one proposed element of the reforms, which was to take the personal independence payment, which isn't related to whether someone's working or not, it's not means tested, it's the state helping individuals cope with the extra costs of a disability. For example, you know, if you have trouble washing yourself, if you need help eating, for example, that was going to be frozen, which basically means a cut in real terms. And there was a big outcry on the Labour benches, and the Treasury has reversed on that. But these are still very significant cuts, £5 billion. You've got independent think tanks like the Resolution Foundation warning today. I mean, this is a lot of money, and it's not going to come from that many people. That's what happens when you target disability. We've already got 1 in 3 disabled people in this country living in poverty. There's no question the system needs reform. Can you reform and support more people into work when you're cutting so much out of the system? That is the big question facing Labour.
Well, the Eye, you know, talks about one of the elements of that reform and one of the big issues for those taxpayers who don't want to pay the bill. And this is, you know, so-called Generation Z who have anxiety issues. Now, the anxiety may lead to illness. I heard one on the radio today who ended up with fibromyalgia because of it. But this is the target, isn't it? It's younger people who are choosing or finding they are not able to go to work.
Yeah, and, you know, once again, the government is choosing to make quite controversial cuts to younger people when it is not cutting pensions, the pension triple lock, just going to point that out. There are savings to be made with systems like this, and it's partly just a political choice, right? This country, this is the future, this story. The government is butting up against the maximum amount that it thinks it can get out of the system in tax. Entitlement for these programmes is only going up and up and up and up. There's one particular scheme, Motability, is projected to have 1 million new claimants over the next, into the 2030s. And you need to control costs somewhere. And I think that what the government is going to try and do when you talk about reform is, if you're physically impaired, if you're fine. But if you do have depression, should the government be paying for your driving lessons, right? Should the government be giving you a car? These are the areas which undermine public support for some of these schemes because they seem iniquitous, and they're a way to make savings. But the challenge for Labour, of course, is their MPs weren't elected to do this. Their MPs are going to hate all of these proposals, and whatever they do, they're going to have to come back for more cuts and more cuts in years to come.
Which takes us to the Financial Times. Keir Starmer has said, you know, I'm not in it for austerity, we're not returning to austerity. Liz Kendall today saying, I'd have made these cuts anyway. It's not about the money. You don't believe her. So what?
No, I think they would have done welfare reform.
Yes. Is this nearly all departments?
Well, this is a depressing story for HREs, because essentially what the FT is laying out is the worsening economic climate has removed what the economists call headroom. So she needs to find more cash just because she's getting less money than forecast from things like tax receipts. Plus, they've got to find this extra money for defence spending, and there's a lot of political consensus that we need to be spending more on defence as a country as America kind of takes a step back from European security. So where is this extra money going to come from? The problem is, after 15 years of austerity, there isn't easy stuff to cut. In fact, if you look at the public services budget, the spending settlement is so tight for the last 3 years of this Parliament. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said it didn't really see how the government was going to meet it anyway.
So what's your best guess then? What faces the top?
I think they're going to have to put taxes up, actually. And I think at some point, the problem is they've hamstrung themselves with an election pledge which said they weren't going to put taxes up. But I think that, you know, given that defence spending has to go up significantly, there is a chance that they use that and they go out. I mean, it's true. They go to the country and they say, The world has changed. We need to be spending more on defence.
But they fight an
and we've got
election
to pay
on
for it. No, they do it before the election.
Yeah, I think there was a line here which suggested that she will not be changing her fiscal rules and she will not be putting taxes up. So, you know,
she would definitely be saying that at this point.
Yeah, Reeves has rejected Labour calls to loosen the fiscal rules, and her allies do not expect the Chancellor to fill the gap with tax rises. I know you want to talk about that, but do you mind if I move on?
No, go ahead.
OK. Let's go to the Times then, which is what was agreed today in this phone call between Donald Trump and President Putin. Putin keeps ceasefire hopes on a knife edge, is how the Times is getting it. He gave him a tidbit of we will not target energy infrastructure, which actually helps the Russians more than Ukraine right now, because the Ukrainians are flying drones towards Russian energy infrastructure. So he gave them something that they wanted anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. What Putin is basically saying, his conditions are that Ukraine must not use a ceasefire to rearm, right? Which, in terms of a short-term ceasefire, makes tactical sense for Russia, because currently it does have the Ukrainians under a lot of pressure in Donetsk and Luhansk on that eastern front. So what he wants says, you know, we don't want this to be a case where they just come back and kill more of our soldiers. But the problem is, of course, that that's the part of the point of a ceasefire, is that it buys Ukraine some breathing room. And if this ceasefire were to become permanent, that couldn't be a permanent condition, that Ukraine is not allowed to defend itself.
So hold on a minute, though. So they're asking that Ukraine does not mobilise and rearm, and yet they're allowed to carry on doing so? That's what he's asking for. So why is that? That's an intolerable condition for Ukraine.
I completely agree with you, but this is how Putin does everything, right?
Works,
I mean, he justifies all of his invasions of other countries on the basis that NATO went into Kosovo, and yet at the same time he says that NATO's intervention in Kosovo was illegitimate, right? This is literally just how he works. But he's playing this along because he knows Trump wants a deal, right? He knows Trump wants to be seen as the deal maker, and so the question is, what's he buying time for? I think.
Yeah. So there we go. There's the Sun, not mincing its words. There, you know, other, you know, lines on the front. No attacks on energy plants, but Vlad can still hit the front line. Don agrees. Ice hockey games. So what did he come out of it? Some prisoner swaps, some of them very injured, and the prospect of ice hockey games.
Yes, I mean, and you know, the prospect of some sort of economic, you know, economic benefits to the US and to Russia, and who knows what they would be. It really does feel like this is leaving Ukraine in a worse position than when these talks began. And you know, there is an extent to which it really feels like Putin is playing Trump, really, because Trump is so desperate to act as a peacemaker. He's after his Nobel Prize, as you know, Henry said, that Putin is actually sort of, you know, in a wily way. And let's face it, Trump already agreed to a lot of concessions to Russia without even expecting anything of them in the first place. It does really feel like, you know, Putin's going to be sort of laughing in the Kremlin at this, really.
Well, so, yeah, apologies, I'm going to call you in because the NASA news conference has started. I do apologise. Henry Hill, Sonia Sodha, you packed a lot in. It was all fascinating. Here's NASA.
Opening remarks from our panel here. And Joel, we'll start with you.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And for those of you tying in remotely, thank you for showing an interest in our great space program. It is awesome to have Crew 9 home, just a beautiful landing. I think many of you heard that back in January, the president asked SpaceX what it would take to bring this crew home. And I will tell you that at the time that question was asked, we were already looking at options of what to do with the Crew 10, Crew 9 situation and how we're going to set that up. I'll tell you a little bit, you know, when you plan these dynamic activities, a lot of work goes into them. For example, for the landing that you guys just witnessed today, there's a number of things that we look at, a number of factors, weather being one of them. You saw great weather today. In addition, we look at the readiness of the recovery team to make sure they're ready to go. We look at the handover time on orbit between the incoming crew and the departing crew to make sure there's enough time for activities to be accomplished before the departing crew leaves. We do have the benefit of having NASA astronaut Don Pettit remaining on board. He'll be coming home on Soyuz in April, and so he'll continue the handover with the crew. We also look at the vehicle traffic, the vehicles coming and going. And when you pull all that together, the International Space Station program, the Commercial Crew program, and SpaceX came up with the plan that we just witnessed. The Crew 10 launch last week, the docking over the weekend, the undock early today, and then the landing that we just witnessed. So just an incredible amount of inputs that you get to pull all that together in order to have a successful operation. I want to tell you, we want to thank the Crew 9 team and the ground teams for their dedication to excellence, their resilience, their flexibility during this expedition, everything they did to have a successful expedition, as you have all witnessed. SpaceX has been an incredible partner for us, and it shows the benefits of the commercial, public, private partnership that we have. So they've just been a huge, great partner throughout all this. Crew 9, in addition to the spacewalks that many of you witnessed, they performed just about 150 experiments on board the International Space Station with over 900 hours of research. And the work we do on the International Space Station benefits the nation, benefits people on Earth, and are the building blocks for going back to the moon and to Mars. So Nick, Alexander, Butch, and Sonny, welcome home. On behalf of NASA, I want to thank the administration. I want to thank all the work of the NASA teams and all the work of the SpaceX teams. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Commercial Crew Program Manager, Steve Stitch.
Thanks, Joel, and thank you all for being here. Greatly appreciate your interest in the Commercial Crew Program and also human spaceflight. Of course, as you know, it's been just a huge week for Commercial Crew. You know, the missions, I think, sometimes seem easier than they are. If I just step back and think about all the challenges we had to launch Crew 9, moving to a different launch pad, adjusting the seats and the crew training, and then, you know, over the weekend, once we docked Crew 10 safely, looking at the weather patterns, finding this great opportunity that we landed at today, adjusting the timeline. You know, it's never easy. Spaceflight's always dynamic. Sometimes it seems like things move from step to step to step, but there's usually different paths along the way. So the weekend was culminated today with the landing of Crew 9. We Dragon splashed down at about 5:57 p.m. off the coast of Tallahassee. That's our first Commercial Crew Program landing at Tallahassee. We've had a couple cargo flights land there. And now it's great to have Crew 9 and the Freedom Capsule back home, and its fourth flight is now in the history books. Of course, we're overjoyed. I watched every crew member come out of the vehicle today. Post-landing, it was great to watch Nick, Sonny, Butch, and Alexander come out of Dragon and smile and wave as they came out of the vehicle. You know, we'll get them, they're on the ship now, we'll get them back to meet the NASA aircraft and then back to meet with their families. If you watched the weather today, it was incredible. Clear skies, real low winds, maybe 3 or 4 knots of wind, and really calm seas. You could see the dolphins swimming around the capsule, which was kind of incredible. SpaceX had a nice drone aircraft flying around and taking footage, and that was just incredible. As I said, the ops team just did a phenomenal job over the weekend, pulling in the landing to get the crew home sooner and take advantage of this great weather opportunity. Really appreciate the versatility of SpaceX, the ISS program, Commercial Crew Program, and the flight ops team in planning out the timeline, looking at the crew's workload, determining whether we could pull this off, doing sleep shifting, all those sorts of things that made this an opportunity happen. I also want to thank our partners at the U.S. Coast Guard. They were there on scene, protecting the scene and making sure that it was safe for mariners in the area. The FAA, the Department of Defense, continuing to support us. You know, it's great to see the teams really in action. Overall, I would say it was a really clean undocking, reentry, and landing. The Dragon vehicle performed extremely well, didn't really have any issues to work. You know, little things, a GPS outage that we reset a filter on and things like that. Today, the sequence went perfectly. We jettisoned the trunk, executed the deorbit burn, closed the nose cone, and did the entry. You could hear Nick call down when we finally got the vehicle back through the blackout, 4.6 Gs, and you could tell they were doing well, and then braced for the parachute deploy of the drogues and then the mains, and then having splashdown. So parachutes performed well. The whole system worked just as planned. The crew's doing great. You know, they'll spend a little time on the recovery ship getting checked out, making sure that they're healthy and ready to go, and then eventually they'll make their way back to Houston. Again, I want to congratulate the entire NASA Commercial Crew Program, the SpaceX team. You know, in many ways, if I step back to last year, this has been 9 months in the making, and I couldn't be prouder of our team's versatility, our team's ability to adapt, and really build for the future of human spaceflight and looking at different ways to do business, taking advantage of one vehicle to launch a crew and then bring back the crew in a different vehicle. Our partner SpaceX did a tremendous job. Every time we asked them to do something a little different, they stepped up and to the plate and did that, including swapping capsules 6 weeks ago prior to Crew 10, and then also adjusting the Crew 9 mission. You know, we'll celebrate for a while. We're going to take some time in Commercial Crew to celebrate this one and spend a little time with the crew. And then we'll move on to Crew 11. Crew 11 will be here before we know it. We'll launch that vehicle as early as mid-July, so we'll start preparing for that. And then, you know, we're working hand in hand with Boeing as well on certification of Starliner, getting that vehicle back to flight. You know, Butch and Sonny's return on Dragon, to me, shows how important it is to have two different crew transportation systems, the importance of Starliner and the redundancy that we're building in human spaceflight for our low Earth orbit economy. We're super grateful for Boeing as well and their investment. They're keenly interested in the landing today. They have a watch party going on and are watching Butch and Sonny come back. And they've texted me, you know, at the build up to this, they're very keenly interested in Butch and Sonny. And then we're interested in their resilience. That whole Boeing team, like our whole Commercial Crew Program team, is resilient and moving forward to the next steps on Starliner. It's been a busy start to 2025. It's hard to believe we're in the middle or toward late March. Looking for an exciting summer as well, and I look forward to your questions, and I'll hand it over to Bill.
All right, thanks, Steve. We'll leave that there. They're thanking everybody. They'll take a moment to celebrate, they said. Really clean undocking and landing. NASA effectively really delighted at how the Dragon capsule brought back the 4 astronauts, one of them Russian, but 2 critically, who have spent 9 months in space, an 8-day mission ending up at 9 days. That's Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore home at last. Well, coming up, we will have the rest of the day's newspapers. Henry and Sonia still with us. Back in a moment.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a 5th Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
British media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, who was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with the stories making tomorrow's newspapers, joined once again by Henry Hill and Sonia Sodha. Let's go to Gaza. I started with the war in Gaza again. Clearly had a ceasefire, shattered overnight by Israeli bombardments. Fears for the hostages now. Israel returns to full war, effectively, on Hamas.
Yeah, the question with this was always, how do you turn a ceasefire into a permanent peace, given that the two parties are diametrically opposed and all of that? And this is where we've ended up. Essentially, the Israeli government says that Hamas had refused to hand over the final hostages. And so, with that, they have resumed hostilities. Now, you can see why Hamas, from a tactical perspective, obviously it's morally abhorrent that they've got them, but would want to keep the hostages. And so maybe the Israeli government is trying to say, we'll come at you anyway, right? You can't use these people as a human shield. But nonetheless, especially with the news that one of Israel's very right-wing parties has, I think the Settler Party, has rejoined Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, this seems to be the case that Israel is back on a war footing and wants this, given how long it took to get to this first ceasefire, how do you get to a second one? And what are the grounds for the second one?
Yeah.
The
problem was that Israel had wanted to have an extension of the Phase 1 ceasefire. Hamas wanted to go to Phase 2, which was the actual agreement, done in Qatar. Netanyahu, the paper tells us, had rejected progression to the second phase because it requires Israel to withdraw troops from Gaza to exchange for the release of more prisoners, which has been criticised by supporters of the Prime Minister. He also needed to get through a budget, did he not? And his right-wing coalition rejoined him after they started the bombardment, which helps him get through the budget. So there are real political reasons why Netanyahu is once again bombing Gaza, which is so depressing for everyone watching this who had hoped for some form of lasting peace, to get to the point where the people of Gaza no longer feared for their life, and those waiting for the bodies of hostages or alive hostages were returned home.
Yeah, and it certainly sounds like it's been very divisive within Israel as well. And, the people who are waiting for family members to come home, some of them have been very critical of Netanyahu in recent weeks and are very critical of this. And they see it as the sort of last hope that they may see their loved ones, or in some cases, their loved ones' bodies, because let's not forget that some of the hostages in Gaza are dead, so it will be bodies coming home to them. And, they see the sort of last hope of being reunited with their loved ones kind of slipping away. I think it shows how fragile a ceasefire deal always was in some ways, because, you had Israel and Netanyahu, whose stated objectives was they wanted to destroy Hamas. And, Hamas is still in control of Gaza. And then, you've got Hamas who, don't want to, were never going to cede power and authority in Gaza unless it was imposed on them through Israeli military action. So it's very hard to see how this gets to a resolution.
Yeah. Quick word about what Kemi Badenoch said about Nigel Farage. He's a reality star. This is on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. He's not fit to run your life.
So Kemi Badenoch gave a big speech today in which she announced, didn't manage to make it the headline, the start of the Conservatives' great policy pivot and their resiling from the 2050 net zero target. But she's also trying to exploit the sudden fragility, perhaps, of Nigel Farage following that big row with Rupert Lowe, because all of a sudden Reform, despite having only 5 MPs, has been casting a vast shadow over politics since the election, especially Conservative politics. This is the first time, really, that a lot of Tories have felt that they're on the front foot, and so she's really trying to use this moment in the spotlight to drive home to voters who, centre-right, right-wing voters, who may have either flirted with voted for Reform last time or be thinking about it this time, that actually most of Nigel Farage, whatever you think of him personally, his parties are always a circus.
You've got 20 seconds. Can you do Lady Gaga?
I can indeed. So Lady Gaga gave a speech when she won an award, and she mentioned the fact that it's quite significant that she won it at the ripe old age, although as somebody in their 40s, I might question this, of 38. But there is a lot of ageism in the music industry, and I think she's right that you get perceived as an older woman at an extraordinarily young age. So that's what this story is about.
OK.
Did I do that in 20 seconds?
Yeah, I think you were slightly under.
Oh,
very well done.
I've never done that before.
Yeah. Henry Hill and Sonia Sodha, thank you so much. Thank you. Let's catch up with the weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, daytime temperatures will rise over the next few days as we develop more of a southerly flow, but the nights are still looking cold with the risk of frost until more unsettled conditions arrive at the weekend. So a chilly start to the day with temperatures over Scotland likely to be as low as -7 Celsius in places. Doesn't sound so warm, does it? A widespread frost and some patchy freezing fog, but any mistiness should clear soon, leaving a fine, dry, sunny morning.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Well, Presidents Trump and Putin have spoken, agreeing a limited 30-day ceasefire in the war in Ukraine. All the top stories ahead.